Hello and welcome once again to the Reading Room. Yet again we're in the wonderful James Reckitt Reading Room, which is a beautiful place to talk about poetry. And I'm here with a poet and writer, Audrey Dunne. Now, you are described as a poet and a writer, and the thing that came into my mind was, is there a difference between being a poet and being a writer?
Well, I sometimes wonder myself, but I do like sometimes to do prose and essays. I belong to the whole Women's Literary Club, so now and again I produce an essay so I quite like that. So I sometimes write essays. I also like writing letters and nowadays emails, but things like that. So I do a lot of prose writing. My creative writing is a very poetic style, but I did do a book in the late 90s called The Stage in My Life, and that was put out by Hutton Press, and that's a story. Yeah. It's an autobiographical account of my life at that time.
So when you're writing prose, and especially factual prose, does it feel like a different process?
Well, writing's always magical. And you don't know where the words come from. They kind of form themselves in your head out of the air. So there's always a magical process in writing. But in poetry, that is more so. In poetry, I kind of wait for the lines to appear. I don't rush them through. Or sometimes I've advocated speed writing for poetry, and that can be a good way, but these days I kind of wait on the words and the idea, so that there is a difference. And of course in poetry, a poem is like a very short story, or maybe a poem can be quite long, but it's like a complete thing. And it has very strong imagery and is of a different style to prose. And I like to think of myself primarily as a poet.
So you're a poet that also writes rather than a writer that has a set of poetical...
But I can turn my hand to all sorts of forms of writing. And in the early days when I was writing, you're finding out what sort of a writer you are. But poetry is my forte, you might say.
In terms of engaging with the wider world as a writer, Wordspin that you do with Alec Gill.
I do.
That's a very socially engaged type of work with writing. Are you a socially engaged writer, or are you a socially engaged poet?
Well, I like to be socially engaged, and I do like my work to be accessible. And that's why if I'm doing a poetry reading or anything, I do believe some poets say that a poem should stand on its own. But I don't think it does. I think people do appreciate context, and I like to reach people with what I'm writing, although some of my poems are a bit obscure. Poetry is obscure, and if you're reading T.S. Eliot or something, you know the way into a poem is sometimes to find a couple of lines that really grab you, and you think, what a marvellous image, and sort of work out from there, because they are sometimes a bit difficult to understand. But the Wordspin came from when I taught creative writing. At one time I taught poetry classes and creative writing classes and did quite a lot in the city. And with Alec, we hired a van. There was something called, there was a Northumberland Avenue Arts Centre.
I remember it well, yes.
Do you?
I've been there several times for several great events. It was very good, and it was the brainchild of a lady called Pamela Della, who's well and truly passed away now. But I did workshops there at Northumberland Avenue, some weekends of workshops, and we decided to take a van out on the road, and Alec and I had a buzz session looking for a title for ourselves, and came up with Wordspin. And the logo is a wheel. And we had some fun. We took it to the pier and we took it across the river and got people writing. One man in particular
Now then, Mr. Young, he did his memoirs called Young at Heart, and he went a long way with that. He was elderly. And so we had a fun, and then we started to produce, if we worked together, Alec and I, which we did sometimes, we did some memory, remembrance.
Yes, in fact, I've read the book.
Yes,
yes.
Workshops. So our very first one has recently been used at the Ferrens in the First World War memorabilia exhibition. And so that very first book that we published together, that sprang from that very successful workshop with the elderly in Bridlington, we called ourselves Wordspin, and we've continued to use that for small publishing experiments, and we did several with the elderly. One that we did was remembering the old council estates, and that was a very successful book, and still people look for that.
Now, one thing that whenever somebody says I teach creative writing, in my case music, something that I always want to ask, not just other teachers, but I ask myself constantly is, can you teach a creative process?
In a way, it's got to be in there. But on the other hand, sometimes you can bring it out. Yes, you can make a place to bring it out, and people find they can write when they didn't think they could. And the Bridlington workshops were a case in point. We had great fun with that. And people said, I can't write, and we got everyone writing. And that was a fun thing to do. Creative writing workshops. I did some at Hull Truck many years ago, well before it moved, and some at the university. But some of my most successful ones I thought were in adult education. And we had great fun there in creating a book out of a class, and we devised all sorts of, I devised various exercises and all sorts of things we could do. And people were always surprised with what they produced. Of course, sometimes you got people who came to those classes who thought, now, shall I go to microwave cooking or shall I go to creative writing? So their hearts weren't always fully in it, but they were mostly surprised at what they did produce and found it a very interesting thing to do.
It's always, I think, gives confidence to students of any kind of creative process if you've got a teacher that has some sort of kudos and some sort of reputation. And I remember the last time I saw you reciting some poetry, it was actually for the launch of one of these books we're going to talk about in a minute. You said that you'd run a poetry prize recently.
I did. Yes, I did.
Tell us a bit about that now.
Well, I went to a poetry reading. I tried poetry prizes off and on, and I went to a poetry reading at the university, and a very good poet who was a woman poet who was up for the poet laureateship, and was one of the people that I think was considered at the time, was Ursula Fanthorpe. And there weren't all that many, when poets go to read, sometimes they just have a handful of people.
Yeah, I've been to a poetry reading. To be fair, there was a reasonable number of poets. There were 6 of them, but they did outnumber the audience.
Yes, it happens, doesn't it? Because people are a bit scared of poetry, I think. But yes, you see, she was about my age, Ursula Fanthorpe, and afterwards I was sat on the front row and she came over to talk to me, and I said, it's so difficult to get poetry out there, and she said, well, why don't you try the competitions? Well, I said, I've tried a few. Well, she said, your name gets known. You see, one of the things is to get your name known. And so I tried a few competitions, and I won that one. It was a special prize for the Bill Winter Award. Somebody had left,
right, yeah. So like a bequest or
a bequest. Yeah. Yes, a bequest. And
So I nicely, and Alex said, let's go. There was no money in it, I might say. It was a plaque.
Yes.
I have a plaque, a bronze plaque at home to say.
But you
that
have recognition, and I think that's something
Yes, that was very nice, and it was in Italy. It was lovely,
Oh, yeah, that's
beautiful.
quite nice then, yes.
Orta in Italy, just north of Milan.
Yeah.
And it was great fun to do. And there was a hill above the city, and we went all toured it round, and each poet had a little chapel to read in. It was, it had sort of the Stations of the Cross on the hill, and each station was a little chapel.
Yeah.
So it was very, very beautiful.
Yes.
Did me good.
The project that you're doing at the moment, which I find fascinating, is the self-published, or they're self-published, but the slim volumes of poetry, and I love the phrase slim volume of poetry.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yes.
I haven't used that
Have
one.
you not?
No, I shall
I know
use
you describe
that.
them as a pamphlet, and I like pamphlet. I like the idea of being a pamphleteer as well.
Yes.
But I do like that. I do like, there's something about a slim volume of poetry that stands.
I think that is better. I
stands
shall
alone.
use
Right,
that if you
there
don't
we
mind,
go.
Darren.
More than welcome.
I think it's a good one
Yes.
to put around, don't you?
And the two that you published so far is Humberlands and Sealed with a Loving Kiss. And if I'm right, the idea is that you yearly are publishing 15 poems around a specific subject or
Yes.
set of
Yes.
subjects. Now, the first thing is, I know in the past when anybody ever mentioned self-publishing, the thing that came to mind was vanity publishing.
Yes.
Yeah. These don't seem anything like that, and these days self-publishing is something that is you can achieve a lot more by self-publishing. It's not a
Yes.
case of basically someone
Yes.
charges you £1,000 to get your poems published or your book published.
Yeah.
People are doing it as a genuine alternative to
Yes.
going to a publisher's. How successful has this been as a publishing exercise?
Well, I see it as a project rather than vanity publishing has a very, is not considered all that wonderful because they don't edit it carefully, and I've seen some very rough things that have come out of vanity publishing. On the other hand, I've seen people who've been very satisfied to go through vanity publishing, people in writing groups who've had a bit of money to spare to go through vanity publishing to make sure their writing is handed down and there's something concrete there, because the written word is to be seen and to be read, and that's can be the great frustration for poets. But poets have always done a certain amount of pamphlet publishing, and I got this idea from talking to a poet and short story writer friend, and that Dylan Thomas had done early pamphlets. But you find even Philip Larkin's first book was kind of sponsored.
Yeah, he was a halfway. He wasn't vanity publishing, but it was a...
It was a hands-on experience for him.
Yes.
He had all the toing and froing.
Yes, it was a very a publishing house that
yes,
was very tiny by comparison.
very,
to even,
very tiny and very local.
Yes.
And it certainly put him on the map as a poet. But you can find any number of poets who've had short pamphlets, and mostly it's been either a small publishing company and something they've been closely involved with. And there are a number of small publishers, they've been them in Hull, who, would take on your poems and such like.
And we still have now some excellent and well-regarded small poetical publishing houses, Blood Axe being one of them.
Absolutely, and local ones are very important,
Yes. But I went to the launch of Sealed with a Loving Kiss, and it seemed extremely well attended.
It did, didn't it? Yes. Well, I'm fortunate in having Alec Gill as my partner, and he is very good on getting your publicity out. And
But you had a fan club there as well.
I had a fan club,
Yes, and it did really feel like you had a set of fans in the audience.
Yes, well, you do get a few people who know you've been around and on the scene for a long time. And I did have a book published by Hutton Press called The Stage in My Life, which was about my early days after my divorce, surviving as a theatre landlady. And so people knew me for that. That was recorded on Radio Humberside in 15 episodes, and I read them myself. So I already have a few people who know. I've been about in the city as a writer for a long time, and I did contact a lot of friends, and Alec put me on Facebook, and you do, if it's quite hard work if you do a self-publishing volume, because it won't go anywhere unless you get busy making sure people know it's there. You've got to really work quite hard at that. And Alec did, well, he presses me to it. He keeps me at it, you see. So I probably wouldn't, but we always did. When we worked together, we always got our books out. So it's gradually developed between us that we expect to have to work at it and make sure. And these days, you know, we have Facebook and we have our emails, and so the word gets around. My literary club always supports me and really respects my efforts in this process, or as I call it, a project. I see it as a project, you see, and I have done it before. I did it in the 80s. I did a similar project, but not so intensively. And I've gained a lot of experience.
And it is a really interesting project, especially as a poetic exercise. Larkin, who's not always great at explaining his creative processes.
No.
He almost made a point of not explaining his processes. Yes. But one of the few things that he did say, and I think was very incisive, it was about finding or coming across a poetic moment or a poetic emotion, and then that was what created the poem, ultimately the spark. And a lot of poets seem to wait for kind of inspiration to create the poems, but you're setting yourself a task of 15 poems in a year about a specific subject or range of subjects. How does that affect your creative process?
Well, some of the poems I've had a long time.
Right.
I've always written about the river. I've always been influenced by the Humber. I've always been influenced by the fact that many of our city, many people have been connected to the sea. In fact, my own father was a merchant seaman. Alec's father was a merchant seaman. So there've always been connections, and I feel that runs in my blood, you see. So that's always, and sometimes I've gone to the pier or up to the Humber Bank, and I go there and scribble and see what comes sometimes. I might have a vague idea in my head, but I do understand what Philip Larkin means, and I'm researching a paper for the Literary Club on Simone de Beauvoir, the French philosopher, and I came across, I was reading some of Sartre's letters to her, and he's in the army on the border of France and Germany, defending that particular area. And he sometimes says, oh, it's poetic. Something happens that seems poetic. And I think the poet sometimes sees that poetic moment and sees that there's poetry in a particular scene or a particular action or a particular person. I know I was working on a poem about John the Baptist. I wanted to do some religious poems. I wanted to follow in the steps of Boris Pasternak and Anna Akhmatova, Russian poets I greatly admire. And I wanted to do some religious poems. I've only done half a dozen. I don't think I can get 15 together. You see, you have to be able to gather them up. You're not writing new ones all the time. And I started this poem about John the Baptist because I had this particular idea, it occurred to me, about just before, just before he goes into prison and has his head chopped off. He meets with Christ on the edge of Galilee, and he says, "Are you really the Christ?" And Jesus says, "Well, all these things are happening." And it seems as if neither of them quite know. And nobody had explored that idea. So I wanted to explore it. And I went to McCoy's Cafe, which is a place I like. And a girl came in, and she was, I've forgotten the name now. Who's the woman that requests John Baptist's head on a plate?
Salome?
Salome, that's it. This girl was Salome. And I couldn't take my eyes off her. And I got the whole middle of the poem from seeing her. So it's like having a poetic moment, as Sartre
And there's a bit
said.
of synchronicity or a bit of serendipity.
A bit
that
of
you
serendipity.
happen to be right in the poem, and then the poetics, part of the poetic subject matter.
Sees it.
Yes.
It is most amazing. And I love it when that happens. And sometimes, cafes are very good for people walking in. Yeah. And you might go into a cafe hundreds of times and never see anything like that. And then just at that moment, you want this image and you're trying to get it out, and you look up and there it is. And it's one of my favourite bits. I haven't got it here with me, so I can't tell you it, because I haven't done my 15 religious poems yet.
Now, I was having a reread of both volumes this week, and I was reading, is it Swans at Barrow Haven?
Yes.
And what popped into my head was Wild Swans at Cooley.
Yes.
And what I was thinking, and I love both poems, but what I was thinking was, as a poet, when you're addressing subject matter that you know is already within the poetic tradition, and other poets are writing about it, and landscapes, sense of place, love, are all things that are constantly being covered by other poets.
Yes.
How do you have the confidence to know that what you're doing is fresh and not to be sometimes even oppressed by the weight of
what's gone before? Well, I don't mind what's gone before. I did a degree as a mature student at Hull University in English, and one of my lecturers, I remember, said, we're all little people sitting on the shoulders of giants, really. So that thank goodness for the influence and the poets we love. And I do love Yeats, and I knew it was a bit cheeky, but I thought, why shouldn't we have the Swans of Barrow Haven? If people want to make that link with Yeats because of the Swans of Cool Park, or is it at Cool Park? All right, I don't mind if they make that link. That's all right. I think his is far superior poem, of course.
He's Yeats, but
Yeats.
But
yes.
He's still a great poem. So
yes,
it deserves its place in a book. And
yes, and my next book, I'm borrowing from Yeats again. Because these people are a great influence on us, and I don't think it matters if we kind of occasionally echo a little something that's settled in our minds from them. And he did a short series, I think, if I remember rightly, called Down in the Sally Gardens, which are in Dublin, I do believe. I haven't been there, but if I go to Dublin, I shall. And next year, I'm taking a leaf out of his book, and I'm doing autumn walks in Queen's Gardens, because why shouldn't we have Queen's Gardens commemorated in poetry? And should those poems become famous, which of course, fame is the spur, we always hope that they will be liked by many people and speak to many people, then why shouldn't Queen's Gardens resonate with that kind of idea? But again, and I've borrowed as well for the next one. I don't want to sound too highbrow for my readers, but I've borrowed from the Japanese poet Matsuo Basho on haiku, and I'm doing a sort of thing of prose and poetry in the next one, and I'm well on with that. And
Right.
I think it's going to be nice. You know.
So is this the next
This is
series?
the next one.
Because I was going to see if I could tease out what the subject matter might be, because I know some authors don't like to jinx their work by...
You do have to keep your work a bit close to your
yes.
chest.
And it is almost like, it's not that they don't want to reveal it, it's that
You feel a bit...
it's not ready, it's
Yes,
going
you
through a
feel a
gestation
bit superstitious, and you must be careful. But it's well enough on this for me not to be too nervous about it, I think, in that respect. And in fact, I've had I wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning often with ideas, I'll scribble them down, because you've forgotten them by the morning. So you really have to do that.
So are the haikus very formulaic in...
No.
Are they
They're
closer to...
my answer to...
Right. So you're
to
not
that
going
form.
for the 17 syllables?
No.
So closer to maybe
No.
imagist poetry
Yeah,
than...
that's right. HD, did you ever come across her? Hilda Doolittle.
Yes.
She called herself HD. Well, she's a great mentor of mine as well. You see, these people are mentors, aren't they? Like, you read them and you think, I just love the mystery of those short words ending on a cliff edge, a chasm they're going to fall down. So I've worked that out, but in my own style, and the prose is easy. You know, it's easy. I hope it's got that easiness of some of those lovely poets with an easy style, you know, and I'm hoping it'll work like that. I'm enjoying it ever so much.
Well, Audrey, hopefully, when the book comes out, we'll be seeing you again and talking just about the new book.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you very much for joining us here on the Reading Room.
Not at all. It's been a delight. Thank you very much, Darren.